According to Boris Johnson, the UK is out in front when it comes to global sanctions against Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin, however, appears unfazed by this. My next guest, a former leader of the Conservative Party, believes his successor should go harder and faster to sanction Russia, as well as other totalitarian states such as China. Duncan Smith is the former leader of the opposition and the MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. So Duncan Smith, thanks so much for your time. Actually, should we just turn this around a little bit? I mentioned China there. We were discussing in the commercial break just how you feel in Taiwan tonight about events in Ukraine, whether you feel quite a lot less safe in your bed.
Well, that's a very good point to start with, because one of the points I made yesterday in the House of Commons was that how we behave to Vladimir Putin has huge repercussions in other parts of the world. And what I call the axis of totalitarian states, China is very much now a driving force. And they are watching carefully, because if the free world doesn't step up rapidly, having started now, they mustn't stop, to make Russia and Putin particularly feel the pain of his having gone into the Donbass and basically legitimized the breakaway states and put in the military, then China will be looking at Taiwan, having already said they're prepared to go to war over Taiwan, and ask themselves the single question. They bailed out of Afghanistan. They didn't do what was necessary with Putin, and therefore he is now in possession of the territory. So what's to stop us eventually taking back Taiwan? It was clear that they don't intend to stand by any of these areas when they're really asked to. So the message is very strong. I'd feel very concerned if I was sitting in Taiwan right now. In fact, I think I have a brother-in-law sitting there at the moment, so I know that he is concerned. So.
As a former soldier rather than as a brother-in-law, I just wonder, if we turn to Ukraine and Russia, do you think the British Army is anywhere near the size? Does it have anything like the mass that it needs? If we are to enter a world where we're going to see almost a return to something a little bit like the Cold War in the 1970s and 80s, with big, substantial garrisons of British soldiers along that eastern border, those Eastern European states who are now petrified of further Russian action, what does that change for Britain's relationship with its military? Are we, do you think, heading back to something more like the British Army on the Rhine and all that stuff?
No, I don't think we're heading to permanent bases at this particular stage, but it's certainly important for us to have a set of armed forces that are capable of being put into different locations at very short notice, so deployed quickly. So that means they've got to be flexible, they've got to have the best weaponry, and there's got to be enough of them. And my personal view for some time now, it doesn't just happen today, but over a number of years, including with the Labour government, is that we actually let the armed forces fall away in numbers. And I've always felt that the number of troops we should have in the regular army should be around about 100,000, because that is a big enough to be able to enter a conflict if necessary, at the same time as still being able to go about the other work that you may or may not have to do, which is as important. So, yes, I do feel like we need to review very much the nature and potency of our armed forces. But I don't think we're returning to a Cold War quite like with the Soviet Union. Now, there is a reason for this. It's because China themselves have become an incredibly powerful country through dint of huge investments from the West. Even today, with a country that practices slave labor, genocide, and persecution, the Western companies are still queuing up to go and invest in China, and seem to, so many of them, not to care a damn what goes on in there. So we have to open people's eyes to the reality of the threat posed by China. If somebody doesn't notice what that threat is, they should ask themselves how it was that we got COVID. The reality was that they didn't declare it, no matter how the origins were. They simply didn't declare it in time. And the result was the World Health Organization were not able to declare it as a pandemic, and it spread to all of us. So those are the examples of what happens when you get nations that simply don't obey or stick by the normal rules that exist for all the rest of us.
And sadly, nearly 6 million deaths later and trillions of dollars of economic damage later, we're not likely to get a definitive answer that allows us to go to them and say, actually, could you cough up a little bit? Just in terms of how the world has changed in the last 6 months, it seems to me, and you mentioned China, that this idea, I wonder how many of us have really woken up to this change, really, at the early stages of the 21st century, that Russia and China have forged an alliance with the express determination to take down the hegemony of the West.
Yeah, actually, I think if you listen to President Xi in China, whose arrival as the head of the Chinese Communist Party and government has very much dictated the direction of travel. So they've given up, it appears to me, on what I call diplomacy in any shape or form, and they now think that they have the might and the power to insist. So what we have here now is a growing economic power in a way that the Soviet Union never was. The Soviet Union was a threat because of nuclear weapons and because the numbers of people it had, but at the same time, it did so on an economy the size of a peanut. So this is really about challenging the ideals and the nature of democracy, free speech, the rule of law, and human rights. This is what President Xi has said categorically. He believes we are weak and that our form of government is not the natural form of government. It's an aberration over the last 200 years, and that the natural form of government is that of dictatorships and autocracies dictating for their public what to be done and not asking them to vote on whether or not they should be the right people to take it forward. Now, that is a direct challenge to us. He makes no bones about that. And the Soviet, he said the Soviet Union, Russia is in the same boat.
So, Ian Duncan Smith, it's depressing, but it feels true, sadly. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.